Doris Mabiletsa, Zanella Nkomo, Mr. Hill Lewis, Mr. Floyd Chivambo, and Mr. Wouter Wessels. Dr. George sent an apology. He said he will join a bit later. Mr. Hill Lewis, Mr. Floyd Chivambo, and Mr. Wouter Wessels.
Okay, no, let's start.
Dr. George
This joint meeting of the Standing and the Select Committee on Finance to get a briefing from the Minister and Treasury officials on the procurement of personnel protective equipment during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our agenda will be is opening, welcome, apologies, comments by the two chairpersons, then the minister briefs the joint committees on procurement, followed by Deputy Minister, DG, and the staff and other officials if they will join him. And then members engage with the briefing, then a response by Treasury. From there, we are going to have many minutes that we have been adopted from from the 11th of March that we'll have to adopt today. Welcome, Honorable Karim, Chairperson, Select Committee. Welcome, Honorable members of the Standing Committee and Select Committee. Welcome officials from Treasury, led by the Minister, the Deputy Minister, the DG. Welcome officials from Parliament, media, stakeholders, and the public in general. We have convened this special meeting to get a briefing from the minister and his team on a matter of public interest, which is about the PPE contracts and related matters of COVID-19 expenditure. The world, and South Africa in particular, is facing a devastating pandemic, COVID-19. This is leading to the economic decline globally and in South Africa in particular. For government to fight this COVID-19, it has imposed the lockdown, which restricts economic and social activities. This has resulted in the economic performance further deteriorating. As you will note, that pre-lockdown, the economy was under technical recession, also downgraded by rating agencies. We are at the time when businesses are closing. There's a decline in revenue collection. There's a rise in unemployment, a rise in food inflation, and uncertainty from society. We are also facing a rise in inequality and a rise in poverty. Also, be that as it may, this is mitigated by an increase in government expenditure. Government has come up with a lot of intervention measures, the 500 billion rand guarantee, distribution of food parcels, 350 rand grants and other grants, and the distribution of personal protective equipments, PPEs. Also, government has gone out to the market to borrow money from banks like, multilateral institutions like the IMF and other banks. In the midst of all these interventions, there is a public outcry in regard to food distribution, PPE contracts, and other COVID-19 related expenditure. It is important for us, honorable members, to be given the briefing by the minister from the genesis where government started to embark on COVID-19 expenditure, that they meet the constitutional requirement in regard to Section 217 of the Constitution. We hope that the tendering process was fair, competitive, equitable, and transparent. As we are losing more jobs, what is it that government is doing to make sure that there is localization, a local content, including promoting industrialization? But this can happen if we don't create jobs abroad by procuring stuff that come from outside South Africa. We are not saying that we should close on international trade, but if there are goods that can be manufactured here in South Africa, why are they not manufactured? And in the main, we talk about the PPEs. So, as I've said, that there is a public outcry in regard to procurement of PPEs from national departments, provincial departments, municipalities, and public entities. Be that as it may, we note the letter written by the DG, National Treasury Instruction number 7 of 2020, to outline the processes that government departments and entities had to follow in regard to PPE procurements. Be that as it may, there are problems that we have witnessed in the past weeks. And as I've said, there's a public outcry out there. So we want to know what steps have been taken so far and what steps are going to be taken to deal with this problem of PPE procurement. So before I request the minister to come and brief the committee, I'll request Chairperson Honorable Eunice Karim to also make remarks. Honorable Karim, over to you.
Thanks, Chairperson. You've covered much of the ground. I can't think that I got much more to say except to endorse what you said. Obviously, ours are not the only two committees that need to look at this matter. Hopefully, the powers that be in both houses will prod the committees to, when they're back in about 2 weeks' time. The Health Committee, for example, the Justice Committee will be very valuable to find out how the new multidisciplinary structures dealing with corruption are going to work, the role of the SIU and its performance. Obviously, they can't ask for specific details of the investigations, but overall progress is within our ambit as parliamentary committees, the safety, police committee, and so on. And hopefully, Chairperson, we will work with these other committees because it's not National Treasury's responsibility alone to take executive responsibility for monitoring, these tenders and so on. Secondly, I mean, members are, as chairs, we're not here to prescribe to anybody, but it's just our role as chairs is also to suggest some broad direction. So to that extent, maybe it's useful for me to suggest, and I'm sure you'll agree, co-chair, that we obviously don't want it to be a once-off thing. We should evolve a program at the end of this in some way, or the elements of a program, and we should monitor this regularly, at least once a month or such, at such intervals. Also, we need some sort of long-term, medium-term, and immediate-term approach to a program, and we should work closely with other committees. And finally, I think, without going too much into this, we shouldn't just look at the subjective factors, so to speak. In other words, Chairperson, we can focus on who's doing this and dealing with them, as it were, as stringently, as decisively, as swiftly as is possible by the appropriate state structures in the criminal justice system in particular. But Chairperson, we also have to look at what you might want to call the objective circumstances. Why are people doing this? And what are the material objective conditions which facilitate this? And we come back to the issues that this committee dealt with in many ways, and other committees, on the need to, ensure appropriate economic transformation, to ensure that there are spaces available in the private sector so that people don't rely on the state sector and tenders from the state to grow, to grow an economy, and to create space for new
health workers.
So what I'm saying, Chairperson, is perhaps we can also look at that over time. Finally, we've heard from the president on Monday about, the words are quite harsh and appropriately so, about scavengers and hyenas. And the chief whip of our ANC in this parliament has spoken about the barbaric behavior of people who are accused of doing these things in these circumstances. And there's all these structures created. But Chairperson, as parliaments, as houses of parliament, we have to actually ensure what action is being done after all these commitments. So we should be very action-oriented after our discussion today and getting more information, Chairperson. We need some sort of program. We need to be decisive as parliament. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chairperson Karim. As you have indicated that we have to be objective. I don't think it will be proper for us just only to look at the negative side of PPE procurement. Lots of lives have been saved up to so far. Intervention that has been there in regard to food parcels and a whole range of other interventions has mitigated the impact that the social outcome we're going to have, more especially on the poor and those who are unemployed, those who have been retrenched. So lots of good work has been done in regard to COVID-19 procurement, but it is overclouded by all these malfeasance that we are experiencing. So I thought it is important for the minister to understand that we have been invited you here only to say all what has been done since COVID-19 expenditure started is negative. Will not be honest to ourselves, because we see lots of lives being saved, lots of food being distributed, and lots of interventions at schools and various areas where there are serious challenges. So that has to be noted, that we note the good work that the state has done in regard to COVID-19. Because if we don't do that, we'll also not be acknowledging the good work that is being done by health workers who are in the front line of COVID-19, and they will be devastated to know that Parliament does not even acknowledge what they are doing. So we are fully aware of the dangers of health workers that they are facing on the daily basis to save the lives of our people. But be that as it may, there are these people who are taking advantage of the procurement, both from business and officials in supply chain management. So thanks, Chairperson. Over to you, Minister Mboweni, and you are welcome.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairpersons. Thank you very much, Honorable Members. And thank you very much to DG and your team. And welcome to all who are participating in this conversation. Let me mention two things from the onset. Firstly, that we have organized a choreography which will guide our submission to this meeting. That choreography is that I'm going to make a few remarks, and then DG will then guide us through the detailed presentation which has been prepared, after which maybe Dr. Masondo might wish to say something. and then we'll hand over back to you, Chair, to guide the meeting going forward, at the end of which I will return to give the closing remarks on our behalf. That's the first preliminary remark I wanted to make. The second one, and very important one, is that you might recall that when I rose in both houses to introduce the adjustment appropriation bill, or the supplementary budget, as I prefer to call it, I made the following statements, and I put this in not quite in quotes. I said, no sooner had we announced the budgets for COVID-19, had the thieves begun to assemble at the door to plan to steal. End of that statement. I repeat, I said, no sooner had we begun to make allocations to fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, had the thieves begun to assemble at the door with the purpose of stealing. Now, and how prophetic that was. Having said that, let me then introduce the conversation. Firstly, we have been facing this devastating pandemic. And we said that we need to rearrange ourselves, rearrange our budget, and aim to fight against the pandemic to the best of our ability. And therefore, the reprioritization of expenditure items towards the fight against the pandemic was an important step we had to take. And we proceeded to do as we done, and I would like to thank both houses of Parliament for working with us until we crossed the line in voting for the adjustments appropriation bill. And I very much thank you for that. It was not easy, it was difficult, but I think you walked along with us. Whether you voted in favor or against is not the issue here. The issue is that we all participated in a democratic process to ensure that we cross the line with the adjustments appropriation bill. Much thank you, Arkansas Sunan. Now, then the question was, let's start the process. And the Director General in the National Treasury then issued the necessary Treasury instructions about how to go about procuring the required material for the fight against the pandemic. In particular, the PPEs and all related items. So the Treasury instruction is there and was issued by the Director General. Now, in an ethical society, one would have expected that all the parties concerned would have followed the Treasury instruction to the letter and to make sure that all that is being procured is in line with the Treasury instruction. Let me indicate, Honorable Chair, that if you go through the detail of the Treasury instruction, you will always find the following being very clear from the beginning. Description of item in the tender, the supplier's name, the unit price of the material being procured, the quantity, the number of items being procured, what is the total price, and is this price in line with the Treasury instruction or not? This is very important, that if all the parties follow the tender process, the procurement process, we would not be having this conversation today. But the fact and reality of the matter is that people found an opportunity to do that which is wrong. So the Treasury instruction is very clear. It says to all accounting officers, to all heads of departments, and gives them the direction which they should follow. At the end of the day, it is the working together between the officials of the National Treasury, according to the Treasury instruction, and the heads of departments and the accounting officers to ensure that we follow the procedure and we do not cut corners. But it also behoves the executive authorities, in this instance, the Department of Health, nationally, but also in the provinces, to ensure that the accounting officers and the procurement officers do that which they are supposed to do. And in this instance, it would appear that there is a prima facie case to be made that not in all instances was the Treasury instruction followed. And that then becomes the subject of the administrative system, the subject for the political or the executive authorities to follow up with the accounting officers. Secondly, it is now up to the law enforcement agencies to follow up on those companies which were awarded these tenders, to follow up on that which was done wrong, to ensure that the culprits are brought to book. And this is very important. There are those things that the National Treasury and the accounting officers and the procurement officers can do, and there are those of a criminal nature which must be followed by the law enforcement agencies. The third point I want to make is that faced with this situation, the Director General issued further instructions, and he's going to explain, as you'll see in the presentation. And once again, had people followed these instructions, we would not be having this conversation. But clearly, these were not followed. One of the key issues is whether some of the companies which were awarded these contracts were properly registered with the company registration office. Were they registered with SARS? Did they go through a competitive process? And so on. And so the administrative investigation has to show us that indeed this was gone into, and that the following companies competed for these contracts, and this particular company won the contract on the basis of the following merit scores. And they have to demonstrate that to us. In the meantime, I am having a conversation again tomorrow with the MECs of Finance to try and find out whether all these processes were followed or not. And if they were not followed, why were they not followed? And who broke the rules? And in my conversation tomorrow, the MECs of Finance, we're going to discuss and insist on the fact that all these contracts must be published for the public to see. And in publishing who won which contract, we also want to know who were the competitors and on what basis did the competitors lose. And also we'll be interested to know about the age of the companies. When were they formed? Were they formed the previous night, or they've been there before? Or what was the case? What was the case with the PEPs, the politically exposed people? Would like to know and deal with that. The fourth point is that there's a lot of discussion about what is referred to centralized as the centralized procurement system. And it's something that we can talk about, and DG Mukhajana will speak a lot about it, and I will buttress that at the end, because it is very clear to me that we have to tighten the processes. It is very clear to me that trust has been broken in some instances. And it's very clear to me that the executive authorities and the accounting officers have to take the matter forward in a decisive manner in a very short space of time. We don't have a year to do this. We have to do it immediately. And as we respond to that which is wrong, we should also praise that which has been correct, as the chair has said. On that basis, Honorable Chair, we are also learning some learnings from the way in which the African Union has set a platform, a singular platform for the AU to purchase these health required materials throughout the continent. The common platform, common pricing, which then all African countries can purchase this required material from one platform with a price that is centrally negotiated. So we're having some learnings there, and I'm sure the DG, when he finishes, will talk a bit about that. I will, at the end, as I indicated, Honorable Chair, talk about some of the possible next steps that we should take when we come towards the conclusion of the conversation. Those were my opening remarks, Honorable Chair. I hand over to you so that you could maybe call upon the DG of the National Treasury, Remu Hajane, to proceed with the presentation. If that might please you, Honorable Chair.
Thanks, Minister. Let us right away invite the DG to make the presentation.
Chair, good afternoon, and good afternoon to honorable members, and good afternoon, Minister and Deputy Minister and colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you issues as outlined by the agenda and explained by the Minister. Maybe let me, at the outset, Chair, indicate the following and say that Section 76, Chapter 9 of the PFMA, Section 76, gives us, as National Treasury, the authority to make regulations or issue instructions applicable to departments. We do that on an ongoing basis. We also issue practice notes insofar as our work is concerned, especially from the Chief Procurement Office, sometimes from the Office of the Accountant General, and in some cases, the delegated functions. You will see some of those instruction notes or practice notes will be signed by the Accountant General, the CPO, or myself. So in this case, Chair, in the issue under consideration, as the Minister explained, there are a number of instructions that we've issued insofar as the issue about procurement of COVID-19 related services are concerned. So we will go into detail with some of those issues. And honorable members, I will also request that we cast our mind backwards to what was happening in February and March of 2020 and the state of mind that the country was at, including at the time of the budget, what we are saying, and then finally towards the period when the president announced lockdown, and then we knew that COVID has fallen on us and we had to do something. So that period, if you remember, globally was some issue that we obviously were worried about and we had to be concerned about. So I will request my colleague who's to bring the presentation on screen so that honorable members we can see and I can take you through some of our thoughts as we discuss address the emergency procurement on COVID-19 related expenditure. So Chair, if you look at slide number 1, basically in that slide, I have listed, please go to the next slide, Laura. In this slide, Chair, I'm basically listing, go back. I'm basically listing, Laura, slide number 2, please. Yes, I'm listing these instruction notes that we've issued since the disaster was declared, by the Minister of, COCTA at the beginning of the year. And these instruction notes were issued in terms of provisions of PFMA and FMA. And for PFMA related, they're all in black instructions, and the red ones, same document, but we are making it applicable so that it's also applicable to procurement insofar as municipalities are concerned. So the provisions of this bulk procurement and procurement are the same. Next slide. And Chair, what we've also done for ease of reference, we've also made sure that honorable members are having copies of these slides, and we have distributed them. Now, in terms of National Treasury Instruction number 8 of 1920, or MFMA Circular number 100, you'll notice that this is a 1920 financial year instruction. It is not an instruction that came now because of COVID. It's an instruction that has always been there like any other instruction. So basically what we said, we have basically said on the 19th of March that this is still applicable. And basically what this instruction note was doing was to facilitate the procurement of PP items that were already on the national transversal contracts. Chair, you will know that the masks, the body covers and body bags and everything that's got related to PPEs are items that departments buy on an ongoing basis. These were not specifically for now. So we have in the past had transversal contracts that basically were providing for these. And at the time when we issued these instructions, because departments were obviously concerned that, what are the others, where are the other suppliers, we also provided a list of suppliers from previous transversal contracts that were issued who gave quotations on bulk supply for items that were not on transversal contracts. In a way, we're expanding the base of suppliers who are there with this instruction note. But as you can imagine, there were limitations insofar as this instruction note were concerned. First limitation was that demand overshadowed the supply. When I said, members, we must cast our mind backwards in the period in February and March, we'll notice that at the time, many countries were holding supplies. Many countries were saying that because the pandemic was beginning to show effect in many, many countries. So as a result, we saw a situation where countries were competing against each other in terms of supplying, in terms of holding this. And the prices of transversal contracts were no longer reflective of the new market conditions, where the issue of demand and supply that has got an impact on price started to prevail. And we saw at the time, towards the end of March, availability of stock running out very quickly in terms of these suppliers who were on the transversal supplier database that was supplying these PPEs, because now we were needing more than what we normally would require because of what potentially was going to be challenges moving forward. Next slide. Laura, next slide. Chair, you will notice therefore that we then issued the second instruction note specifically now for noting what was happening with the stocks running out from supplies being not enough. We then issued instruction note number 3, which was the second instruction which advocated a central procurement agent approach. In this instruction notes, we noticed that PP products were experiencing unprecedented and global demand, resulting in significant price increase and global shortages. Some of these products could not be produced locally in South Africa at the time. And we then had to make sure that it was going to take time for some of these products to be made available and not be able to deliver at the time then they were needed. And Chair, in trying therefore to secure PP products like surgical and other masks, gloves, bodysuits, and many other manufacturing countries also imposed bans, if you remember, in March and April this year, where items were not available and prices then rose sharply, making it difficult and worse because of the volatility of the rand and depreciation of the rand that made things much, much worse. So, and in some cases where some of these products were secured, immediate upfront payments were needed and were required. And suppliers face huge challenges in arranging immediate delivery on stocks. And then we thought at the time, through engagements, in various engagements, we thought a central implementing agent was going to be necessary. Next slide. Necessary because it was quite critical at the time that we were able as a country, to make sure that when we buy in bulk, and thinking that obviously at the time we will obviously implement price. Now, again, with this, there were limitations. Upfront payments required to procure bulk was an issue in most. And at the time, and we know, and we don't have this, government does not have a central system in place to actually procure goods centrally because of how our systems has developed over time. And then at the time, a central procurement intervention was therefore required. And members, you'll recall that this issue caused a big challenge in the country at the time when after going through net joints and actually indicating to net joint that Business for South Africa was, had a solution at the time, and Imperial Health Services was coming in to support and act as a central implementing agent, both for the public and for the private sector. And at the time, the issue was that they have the capacity to actually provide logistic expertise and also to go out of the country to procure, in particular at the time, and you recall, items were only available, excess supply global was available only in China and in South Korea at the time. So as a result, this process, as we are beginning to implement it, we then issued these instruction notes. We tried to explain how the instruction note was going to happen. But however, there was some misinformation about the process. There were issues of local participation, issues of black participation in supply chain processes, whereby clearly there was an outcry at the time in March, April around the process as anticipated, then favoring certain types of suppliers and actually having direct impact on price. And interested parties at the time were interfering. There were various interferences, and that in a way was a negative publicity in the country. Therefore, honorable members, I then decided at the time, without even further consultation with other people, we withdrew instruction note number 3 because of the challenges that were experienced in terms of how we were interacting with the process and how it was anticipated that Imperial Health Services and Business for South Africa, including at the time the Solidarity Fund, were going to assist in actually making sure that PPEs are not an issue. Next slide, please. In ensuring that PPEs are not an issue. So we therefore then made sure that we withdraw this instruction note number 3 and came up with instruction note number 5. Instruction note number 5 was simply saying, let's go back to emergency procurement instruction that we've issued. Instruction number 5 was replacing instruction note number 3. And we made it very, very clear that instruction note number 5 is replacing instruction note number 3. And we were at the time saying it is therefore important that we still are in an emergency procurement mode and supplies were running short, suppliers could not meet the demand. And at the time we said, let's open it up, honorable members, let's open it up so that anybody who has material, who has PPE in the country, globally and elsewhere, they must supply, but we had conditions applied to that. At the time we said whatever they will be produced or supplied should be specified. The specification should be that of the Department of Health, World Health Organization, including the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition for cloth masks in particular, because at the time cloth masks became an issue, and we knew at the time that departments like education had to procure masks. And we said prices that will be supplied should be the same or lower. And we had in every of the attachments, in every of the instruction notes, we had attached reference prices that the suppliers could not provide at the price above what was set by us at the time. There was also another condition that says suppliers and manufacturers must be registered on the central supplier database. And once you register there, obviously all the other necessary, your tax matters and all of that will be obviously coming automatically in that space. After further consultation that took about a week or 2 or 3 weeks with, for instance, with COSATU in particular, and COSATU and other stakeholders in the country, including business formations, in particular business, sorry, slide before, go back, please. Laura, please go back to, yeah. In terms of slide number 4 here, bullet number 4, after engaging with COSATU and many other stakeholders, we then decided that there should be other requirements that talks about local production, local supply of textiles, because at the time we needed huge, big numbers around cloth masks in particular, whereby industry, including the textile sector, we were seeing an opportunity for the clothing and textile sector, including for them to really start participating in the supply of these cloth masks in particular. So again, in this instruction note, like before, we provided a list of possible suppliers and manufacturers, and this we got from the Department of Small Business and as well as the National Bargaining Council for the clothing industry. Why were we doing this? We are doing this in order to ensure that we know the people who will supply the right quality and obviously will be then registered. So we did not, basically what this instruction note was strengthening what we said in instruction note number 3, and in terms of the requirement, and in there, the key issue for this was that local production and local suppliers were and should be considered, taking into account the kind of discussions that we had with stakeholders, as example, COSATU and then Black Business Council and others. Next slide. Now, there were limitations also, as you can imagine. One of the key things, and that we noticed, was that obviously all of what we are trying to do in an emergency mode is prone to exploitation. Because in many ways, we then realized that there are instances where a few suppliers would actually be the ones considered. And that was a limitation in the way this was approached, because you can fulfill all the 4 requirements, but then you still are the preferred supplier without actually the departments exercising essentially what was not withdrawn. What cannot be withdrawn, Chair, I must emphasize, Honorable Chairs, is that other procurement-related prescripts, whether in the PFMA or in the Treasury instructions or in the Treasury regulations, including the PFMA, are not withdrawn. They were not withdrawn. So it is expected still that supply chain officers and procurement officers would still have to subject themselves to emergency procurement as provided for in the current legislation, even before COVID-19, because they are there. Controls were also set so as not to be a burden responding to the pandemic in decentralizing procurement as we respond. We therefore wanted to ensure that good financial management procedures remain in place. But we also saw rampant misuse and abuse of public resources related to this procurement. And then obviously we also noticed that it's important that we update this instruction note. We then had a discussion in FOSAT. Second slide, please. Next slide. We then had an instruction in FOSAT, Forum of South Africa's Directors General, whereby the DG in the presidency, with the instruction from the president and the instruction from the collective of cabinet, also saw an opportunity to say, and still at the time when we released this instruction note, and I must emphasize, honorable members, and refer to the date of this instruction note. This was around the 26th of May when we issued this instruction note number 7, issued by the Office of the Accountant General, but obviously signed by myself. Now, these were issued to give accounting authorities and accounting officers proactive guidance on how to revisit their control environment in response to COVID-19. The title of this instruction note, honorable members, I must just read it out. It says, National Treasury Instruction Note number 7 of 2021, preventative measures in response to the COVID-19 pandemic that resulted in the national state of disaster. So we were in this instruction note giving clear instructions to accounting authorities and accounting officers responsibility in terms, reminding them of what is responsible, what they are accountable for. And as I said, as requested by FOSAT, an emergency procurement working group of large PPs project was established under the chairperson of DG to provide input to this process. We had various DGs, including state security, including the Hawks, the head of the Hawks, including the DG in the presidency, whereby we then went to FOSAT on 2 occasions. Now, FOSAT is inclusive of everyone, including provincial directors general. The purpose of this instruction note was to provide preventative measures as a result of COVID-19 emergencies and the need to be responsive and flexible, whilst ensuring value for money and minimizing the risk of fraud, corruption, negligence, error, incapacity, and also ensure that internal control systems of a department, constitutional institution, and public entity consider, among others, the change in operating activities in the existing control environment, revisiting risk assessment processes, designing and amending control activities to address new or elevated risks, identifying information to support effectiveness and efficiency of new existing controls, reassessing, and I must emphasize, reassessing internal external communication and identifying additional control measures to monitor the activities. Basically, what we were saying here with these instruction notes, accounting officers were being reminded that you are responsible. I'm saying this because many accounting officers, next slide please, many accounting officers would sometimes not pay too much attention and leave this to CFOs and also leave this to supply chain officers in departments. So by reminding accounting officers with these instruction notes, we wanted for them to ensure that we actually are serious about what we need to do and what needs to be done and at what point. So honorable members, with these 3 instruction notes in particular, and the processes that we are trying to experience, at any given point in time, giving guidance, and at any given point in time, if you look at the annexures, we were reducing prices of certain type of supplies impacted by demand and supply of that particular product. And in some cases, we did reduce prices, and we were reducing prices, ensuring that government is not taking for a fairer ride in terms of suppliers enjoying the benefit of high prices when prices are generally reducing. So we were reducing prices in some instances, in some, not all products, but in some products. And it was then expected of departments to ensure that they adhere to these prices. If the price of a 3-ply masks at any given point in time was 14 Rand or 12 Rand, we were then saying, indicate, including VAT, indicate the new price. And my instruction note would at any given point say the applicability of this instruction note is the day after the signature date. So if I sign on members on the 29th of May, it means come the 30th of May, this instruction note then become relevant and applicable. So that's what we are bringing in the system, and we expect that everyone should subscribe to those. We are bringing just some ideas around what we have spent so far in terms of COVID-19 related expenditure and taking you back. Now, these numbers change all the time. It depends when you are running these, and it also depends how exactly departments are beginning to account for this because it's work in progress. So the numbers may fluctuate and change as and when we present this. And as of today, this is, I think, around the 12th or so July when we ran these numbers that I'm going to go through. We propose in the supplementary budget that some 145 billion will be used as a package. And we obviously, as indicated in the supplementary budget, we indicated an amount and we also recorded some spending. We also indicated what the money is going to be used for and what departments in particular. So I will skip this slide and go to the next slide. It's just for background purpose. The next slide, basically what it does, it basically tells you as at a particular date, next slide, Laura, at a particular date, what was the expenditure at a given point in time in July. Laura, please move to the next slide. Yes. This slide again tells you as at between April and July, what was the expenditure, and all of those. These are just examples. Record of what we spent money on. And as we say, go on to the next slide. As we say here, honorable members, these numbers change, they are not firmed up, but it's to give an idea that we are tracking COVID-19 related expenditure in terms of our system. So this is to exactly demonstrate that we, at any given point in time, we will know who's spending what and how much in relation to COVID response package announced by the president. Next slide. Now, we are considering new controls, honorable members. We are considering new controls. I've recently, and by the way, what I must indicate along the way, I have been having discussions and formal and informal discussions with the Auditor General in terms of what he should be looking at, in terms of what we want him to look at, and what he has to do insofar as that institution is concerned. We'll be issuing. I've just actually, as early as yesterday, finalized and signed off on the forward, in my part of the forward that will go to this preventative control guides that we will issue jointly, that aim at controlling and assisting management to identify the risks of misappropriation, fraud, and corruption before a transaction takes place. Remember, the instruction note is just to tell you what to do. This is a guide that actually tells you how to do it so that you will not found wanting. We agreed with the AG that this time around, insofar as COVID-19 related expenditure, AGSA does not have to wait for end of financial year next year to start auditing expenditure of this magnitude. We said we'll do it as his team is on the ground, will be on the ground, so that accounting officers can be held accountable. And these guides basically provide accounting officers with a toolkit of possible solutions to make preventative controls a reality. So basically, what we also are emphasizing, emergency procurement of PPEs and protective clothing is ended. And institutions have to revert back, because the issues of demand and supply are not an issue anymore, whereby you go to any clicks today, you go to any shop, you will get sanitizers, you will get masks. They are easily available. We have boosted local production. We have to emphasize local production of face shields, of masks. All of that is now in place after a few months of challenges that we had in terms of how companies in South Africa can begin to take advantage of the opportunity that's here. And obviously that has got an impact in terms of price. So as a result, we have the view that we can then go back to measures that we all know that are not, you have to then, in this case, be part of a procurement list, the product that you supply, the price will continue to be determined by us. The price will continue to be dictated by us, because we think we are better placed to understand where the price is at any given point in time without actually further exploitation. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but further exploitation by the state. And that procurement must be complied with all existing instructions for procurement. So, and as I said, we will lock absolute price for PPEs and protective equipment, and we'll ensure that NT provide names to the names of all PPE appointed service providers to be published on our website, and so that it's easier for us to analyze aggregate data and actually ensure that procuring agencies are known and are there. Again, we are not limiting this to specific companies. Again, it will be an open process where anyone who will be able to supply, they must be known, they must be registered, including the issues, by the way, that the minister mentioned around how to relook at this area in terms of who can and who cannot be able to supply. We all know that in this instance, government employees cannot participate or provide such services to the state. If we have to expand that, we'll obviously do that. Next slide. Now, there are many issues under consideration, and I'm going towards the end now. There are many issues under consideration. We all know that the procurement bill is underway, and I know my friend Matthew Parks already indicated to us that we have to make sure that this bill, Chair, with your permission and with other process in Parliament, would expect that this bill, once it hits Parliament, that we actually make sure that it go through the process, because it's quite important. We will, when need be, review existing PFMA, FMA, take into account measures of emergency procurement, and strengthening the accountability of accounting officers. What is important, and Minister said I must emphasize this, what is important and is quite clear is that we have to start modernizing public procurement, including automating public procurement systems with enhanced due diligence and increased efficiency in processing requests. What do I mean by this? If you look at big companies or logistics companies and how they actually make it easy for companies like Macro, Checkers, Pick n Pay, Discovery Health, Discam, and Peps, all of these companies that we all know, Chicken Licken, Kentucky. Behind those, we believe they are automated systems that make the supply and of material and the supply of goods and services much easier. If the private sector can do it, why can't government begin to do it? We cannot rely on old archaic systems that do not in any way help us. Now, Chair, I would want to ensure that we actually, as National Treasury, and we are going to do that, ensure that we actually make this possible, whereby we have to look for many, capacity, whether it's in the private sector or not, we will look for it, and we'll match it with the capacity that we have in order to come up with state-of-the-art project management services in the procurement, preloading, distribution, inventory management of PPE program rollout. We'll have to do that. We'll have to identify things that we can run centrally, jointly with the Department of Health, and we will be engaging deeper with the Department of Health around how to come up with regional warehouse solutions, e-warehousing solutions, an ICT platform that will make it easy for us to enable government departments to place centrally orders so that a municipality in somewhere in Limpopo cannot be charged 40 Rand when a national department somewhere is charged 15 Rand for the same equipment or the same material or the same item that's needed. So we think by automating systems, it will also cut out the bureaucracy that's there in terms of suppliers being paid on time. It will cut out the bureaucracy where, for instance, delays are there in paying small or big, medium enterprises in terms of, payments after they've actually paid government. So we think, Chair, by automating and modernizing, I must emphasize, automate and modernize our procurement system should be in place, and that must be done urgently. And we are putting all efforts as National Treasury to design and develop, with the assistance of the private sector, design and develop an integrated ICT solution, whether it's an app that will be distributed across. We have to be modern in the way we do this, and this will eliminate all the challenges that we know and talk about. On that front, I'm going to actually make sure that, Chair, as Honorable Karim was saying, keep the committee informed about step-by-step processes insofar as this is concerned. We have to ensure that we have to think about continuous information exchange between how we can prevent, investigate, prosecute, so that future preventative measures are informed by investigations, lessons, and prosecution outcomes that may come out as a result of the investigation that we do. What we cannot keep quiet about, which is an issue, and Minister did make mention of it, is politically exposed persons and their participation in public procurement. This will require us to come up with more stringent review, including many other things around the service type provision, the age of the business, etc., and what the business is all about. Hybrid model of national procurement and local distribution or listed service to allow for economies is important, and we believe that anti-corruption measures should also be put in place. We must think outside the box in terms of how we're going to sort this and how we're going to make sure that our procurement system is, fraud-proof in a way that we do that. So, honourable members, I will leave it here in terms of what we wanting to do and what we have done. But the key message is that the responsibility to procure still lies in terms of our current law with the accounting officers, and they must be held accountable. If Department X in Province X or Municipality X has procured goods more than what the price reference list was indicating, that accounting officer must be held accountable. If they have appointed a service provider who's not registered that accounting officer must be held responsible. If there are incidences of fraud, corruption, and many other things that can be proven, let law enforcement process take, process here in the way that we want to explain these things. So, Chair, I will leave it at that, and maybe, Chair, allow a minister or Deputy Minister of Finance to come in and indicate if there are any other issues that I may have left out in my presentation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Minister, Deputy
Chair,
Minister.
waiting for your guidance, Chair.
No, thanks, Chair. I don't have much to add because yourself, the Minister, as well as the DG, you've largely covered enough ground. And what we're looking forward to guidance, discussions on this matter from yourselves. The only thing I want to add is that obviously South Africans expect us to manage their money prudently, free of corruption. And for instance, we spend around 1 trillion rand as government through procurement, buying goods and services. And as the minister indicated, it's very clear that in this instance, or in certain instances, insofar as the way in which some of the government departments, local government, it does look like there's clearly instances in which the trust of our people has been betrayed insofar as the way in which we need to be managing the public finances. And I must just indicate once more as I conclude that we've put a lot of measures as government, but also yourselves as Parliament, to put what I call preventative measures as well as reactive measures to make sure that we run our public finances